I have to complete a mission independently in order to become an official member. Klein was taken aback. But we might not even have a mission this week, and it might not be so simple. Wouldn't this mean that it'll take me 1 to 2 months to become an official Nitork? Only then will I get a pay rise. Old Neil sniffed at the coffee and shot a glance at him. It's only a ritual among Nitorks. After all, we stand at the peak of beyond the danger and don't want our teammates to act like children who require constant care. This won't affect the salary that you'll receive as an official member, or your privileges needed to fulfill your duty. So it's just a ritual to gain the recognition of the other Nitorks. But, Mr. Neil, why did you emphasize that it would not affect my pay grade as an official member? Did I make it that obvious? Klein touched his face and gave an embarrassed smile before asking, does it have to be a mission of the beyond a variety? That should be the case, but your performance yesterday was truly outstanding. You ingeniously killed a beyond that's at least at sequence 8. I believe Fry, Royal, and the rest have already acknowledged you. Therefore, I might just assign you to an ordinary mission, old Neil said before suddenly sighing. You'll have your salary increased several-fold. I'll never encounter something like that again in my lifetime. Klein chuckled as he raised the matter about his sequence pathway. Mr. Neil, do you think that the corresponding sequence 8 of Sierra is Clown? In fact, thinking back to the description from the confidential documents, it did seem to add up. A job good at fighting with artifice. I can't give you any guarantees, but I think it's highly likely. Firstly, it matches up with what's said on the documents. Their agile movement and deception-based battle style are key points. Next, other sequence pathways have similar situations. Do you know the corresponding sequence 8 for Mystery Prior? Old Neil asked with a chuckle. No, it's not written in the information provided by the church. Klein shook his head honestly. Old Neil chuckled briefly before saying, I'm close friends with 2 old guys from the Machinery Hive Mind. They mentioned it in passing, as a joke. The corresponding sequence 8 potion of Mystery Prior is Millie Scholar. Did you hear that, Millie Scholar? Goddess, I don't like Millie Combat at all. This doesn't suit the image of a Mystery Prior at all. I can understand Mystery Priors pursue the mysteries behind things. Millie Combat is one of those mysteries, Klein said after some thought. Old Neil finished his hand-ground coffee. All right, let's not waste time. Let's continue our mysticism studies. You still have a lot of ritualist magic that you need to grasp. You also need to learn how to create amulets and charms. All right, Klein sat down and planned out his schedule for the day. In the morning I'll study mysticism and read through all sorts of historical records. I'll submit the compensation request. After lunch, I'll practice at the shooting club. Then, I'll head to the DeWayville Library at Golden Ingles Borough and see if I can borrow the corresponding monograph and journal regarding the Hornus Ice Main Peak. After doing all that, if I have time, I'll spend some time at the Divination Club. I can't slack off on my acting. Once the compensation request is approved and I receive the money, I'll be able to buy a new suit on the way home. Yes, I'll apply for the materials tomorrow morning and try to make a protective amulet to ward off danger from Alyssa and Benson. In a dining hall adorned with a chandelier and elegant decorations. A few friends were congratulating Joyce Meyer on his escape from danger and his return to Tingen. We all read the news. Just the written description alone was enough to scare me, a man with a short stubble on his chin said wistfully. Joyce, I can't believe you went through such an ordeal. Cheers. The tragedy is over now, and the sunlight shines down upon us. Exalted as the steam. Joyce and his fiancée, Anne, raised their cups and clinked them together with their friends. Then, they gulped down what little champagne they had left. Anna was extremely worried at the time. I suspect that she cried every night. Whenever I invited her for some afternoon tea, she was always absent-minded. Thankfully, you're finally back now. Otherwise, I reckon she would have passed away just like that, a young lady, with a cute small nose and coiled brown hair, said to Joyce as she glanced at Anna. If Anna were to experience something like that, I'd be the same. I might be in an even worse state. The aquiline nose Joyce gave his fiancée, who was sitting beside him, a gentle look. Anna wasn't used to expressing her emotions in front of others. She looked at the opposite end of the table and said, Bogda, why have you been keeping your head down this entire time? I can sense how terrible your mood is. The young lady with the petite nose answered in Bogda's place. Bogda is sick. The physician told him that there's something seriously wrong with his liver. He can only use medicine to reduce the pain, but it doesn't treat his illness. He needs to undergo surgery. Lord, when did this happen? Anna and Joyce asked in surprise and concern. Bogda was a young man with short hair, but his face was sallow. His usually brilliant red eyes were replaced with a dim glow. It happened last week. Since Joyce wasn't back yet, I told Irene not to tell you, Bogda explained with a rueful smile. Joyce asked staidly, have you decided when you'll undergo surgery? Bogda's expression changed a few times as he said, no, I haven't decided yet. As you know, those surgeons are practically butchers. The patient is like a piece of meat on a chopping block, allowing them to butcher people as they please. I've read a lot of reports. They'll even use an axe for amputation. Lord, I suspect I might very well die on the operating table. But if you delay it further, then surgery might not be able to save you, the man with the stubble said as he tried to persuade him. At that moment, Anna interjected, Bogda, perhaps you can consider doing a divination. If the divination indicates that everything will go smoothly, then proceed with the surgery as soon as possible. If the outcome of the divination is bad, seek other means. Seek it with the help of the fortune teller. I know of a real, mysterious fortune teller. No, I should address him as a seer. I believe he can definitely help you. For real? Bogda returned with a question, clearly looking doubtful. Their other friends shared the same attitude. Yes, Anna nodded without hesitation. I hired his divination services, and after divining Joyce's situation, he told me to return home. Your fiancé is at home waiting for you. Back then, I was like all of you, filled with doubt. But when I returned home, I really saw Joyce. He was really back. I can testify on this point, Joyce echoed. He didn't mention that he had sought Klein's help in interpreting his dreams. This was because the police had informed him that Trice hadn't been caught yet. Therefore, he had to keep it a secret in order to prevent revenge from being exacted upon him. Lord, this is absolutely unbelievable. Is divination really that magical? Amidst the shouting, Bogda thought deeply for a moment before saying, perhaps I should get to divination. Anne, Joyce, could you tell me the seer's name and address? Anna heaved a sigh of relief and said, you made a very wise choice. That seer is at the Divination Club at Howes Street. His name is Klein Mulready. Golden in Dewsbury, the Wayville Library. Klein used the introduction note from his mentor's letter to successfully apply for a borrowing pass. As he flipped the tiny card in his hand, he asked a few librarians, do you have the research of the Hornus Main Peaks relics here? It was published by the Lowen publishing firm. A librarian immediately answered, please wait a moment. Let me check the records. He turned around and looked at the drawers. He pulled open the letter that matched Hornus Ice and flipped through a card that was filled with single words that followed a particular order. On careful inspection, he shook his head and said, sorry, sir, we do not have this book in our collection. How regretful, Klein answered in clear disappointment. From the looks of it, I need to write to the Lowen publishing firm or pay a visit to the Toy University. Meanwhile, he sighed inwardly at how dated the management of the libraries of this world was. You people need a computer. Unfortunately, I can't produce one. Klein made a silent, self-deprecating comment and turned to ask, then, do you have the journal issues of New Archaeology and Archaeology Summary? We do, the librarian confirmed. A gentleman just returned them. He flipped out the corresponding card and pointed Klein in the direction of the bookshelf. Klein went over to the bookshelf, scanned the journal issues, and pulled out the ones his mentor mentioned. Then, he randomly found a spot by the window to sit down. Under the bright afternoon sun, he began reading the information in the library quietly. Ancient relics don't solely exist on the main peak of the Hornus Ice mountain range. They're also spread out across the surrounding forests, valleys, and gentle slopes around the main peak. These relics are formed from lofty domes and gigantic stone columns. Honestly, they can be described as magnificent. I'm curious as to how the original residents mine and process these rocks. Hypothetically, let's assume that they performed their mining operation on a spot without needing to send them up the mountain. There's a strange pattern where the relics become larger in size the closer you are to the mountain peak. But surprisingly, there are no ruins on the peak. According to our hypothesis, there should be palaces that don't resemble man-made buildings, divine halls used for sacrifices. Palaces that don't look like they were man-made divine halls used for sacrifices. Could it be the one that I saw in my dream? While Klein ruminated, he suddenly heard footsteps approaching him from a distance. He looked up and saw a familiar face, a face that often appeared on the papers. He had a squarish face, thick eyebrows, a firm nose, short dark blonde hair, azure blue eyes, and tightly closed lips. All of these features belonged to a certain famous person from Tingen City, a philanthropist, entrepreneur, and the owner of this library, Sir de Wayville. Beside the Wayville was the middle-aged butler who Klein had met before. Klein watched them walk by from more than 10 meters away. Out of curiosity, he raised his right hand and lightly tapped his glabella twice. Various color surfaced his auras and entered Klein's eyes. He casually studied Sir de Wayville's condition. He's very healthy. There are almost no hidden problems. His emotional state is horrendous. Amid the dullness, there's frailty. His mental state is frail. He has trouble sleeping well. But the purple aura of his head is completely fine. Klein muttered silently to himself as Sir de Wayville walked off and left the library. Retracting his gaze, Klein pinched his forehead and sighed inwardly. Being a tycoon sure isn't easy. He didn't pay much attention to the matter and returned his gaze onto the journal issues in front of him. Klein didn't find a lot of clues after reading each of them. He could only confirm a few things. Firstly, there existed an ancient kingdom on the Hornus Ice mountain range, as well as its surroundings. The ancient kingdom's history dated back to at least 1500 years. Secondly, their architectural style was primarily about being grand. They left behind all sorts of murals, and from those murals, it could be deduced that they believed that the Evernight would protect the loved ones of the departed. Finally, in the ruins, there were symbols that represented the Evernight everywhere, but they were clearly different from the Evernight sacred emblem. If I had a chance, no, even if I have a chance, I'll never go there, Klein muttered with clenched teeth. He vowed not to court death. After tidying the journal articles and returning them back to their original spots, he put on his hat, lifted his cane, and left the de Wayville Library. Divination Club. Bogda looked at the beautiful lady in charge of receiving guests and said, I'd like to have a divination. Angelica smiled politely and said, do you have a preferred fortune teller? Or would you like to flip through our introduction guide and choose the one that's most suitable for you? Bogda pressed the right side of his abdomen and gasped silently for breath while saying, I wish to have Mr. Klein Mulready divine for me. but Mr. Moretti is not here today, Angelica answered with uncertainty. Bogda fell silent for a moment as he paced a few steps and asked, when will Mr. Moretti be available? No one knows. He has his own matters to deal with. From what I've seen, he usually comes here on Monday afternoons, Angelica said as she pondered over the matter. All right. Bogda's face darkened as he turned around, planning to leave. Sir, you can choose other fortune tellers as well. For example, you can choose Mr. Harness Vincent, who is famous in Tingen City. Angelica tried her best to prevent the loss of business. Bogda stopped in his tracks and considered it for a moment before saying, no, I only trust Mr. Moretti. Well, can I wait here for a moment? Perhaps he might come after he's done with his matters. No problem, Angelica said with a warm smile. Bogda went to the sofa and sat down. Sometimes he stroked his cane. At other times he looked out the window, clearly looking rather impatient. Seconds turned to minutes. Just as Bogda's mind was in a mess, unsure if he should continue waiting or leave, he heard the beautiful lady exclaim in pleasant surprise, "Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti." Klein saw the familiar Angelica and was just about to ask why it was always her. Did she not need to rest or take any days off? However, he immediately took into consideration that he was a seer, so it was not appropriate for him to ask such questions. Instead, he had to use the tone of a charlatan and say something like, "How marvelous it is for fate to compel us to meet once again, Madame Angelica." Ah, would this sound like I'm hitting on her? Klein's mind whirled as he finally replied with a smile, "Good afternoon, Madame Angelica. A customer wishes to hire you for a divination." Angelica pointed to Bogda, who had hurriedly stood up from the sofa. Someone actually requested for me. Klein took off his half-top hat in pleasant surprise, pinching his glabella twice while doing so. "Good afternoon, sir." He looked over when his voice suddenly came to a pause. In his spirit vision, he saw the requester's liver looking dim. It was nearly black in color. It was making the rest of his body unbalanced as his aura was thin in various places. Klein deliberated over his words and he said in a serious expression, "Sir, you should see a doctor and not seek a divination." Bogda stood stunned on the spot as he immediately gave a pleasant look of surprise while muttering, "How fascinating." Anna wasn't lying to me. He hurriedly looked up at Klein in earnest. "Mr. Moretti, I've already seen a doctor and might have to undergo surgery. However, I'm frightened about the surgery. I would like to divine the outcome. The surgery of this era is really fraught with danger, although Emperor Cell had given the impetus. This era still lacks most of the necessary technology." Klein didn't reject his request and nodded slightly. "My divination fee is 8 pence. Is that fine?" 8 pence? Bogda exclaimed in surprise. "You're only charging 8 pence? According to Anna's description, and the performance Mr. Moretti had just shown me, I'm willing to pay at least £1. Haven't you heard of smaller margins with large volume?" Klein was embarrassed for a moment. After thinking for a few seconds, he calmly smiled and replied, "It is enough just being blessed with the ability to receive revelations from the divine and catch a glimpse of fate. Therefore, we must maintain our humility and suppress our greed. Only by doing so can we continue being bestowed with our gifts." "You are a true seer." Bogda held his chest and bowed, his tone filled with sincerity. Upon receiving Bogda's praise and trust, Klein's spirituality seemed to relax. As for the description of his principles, it also gave him some new insight. "Miss Angelica, is Topaz available?" He turned to the beautiful lady beside him. Angelica heaved a sigh of relief for Bogda as she smiled sweetly. Yes. After entering the divination room, Klein instructed Bogda to lock the door. Then, he sat behind the table and pinched his forehead. "Shall we use tarot cards for the divination?" he inquired with a smile. Spirit dowsing was only suitable to determine matters related to him. As for drawing an astrolabe, it was too time-consuming. "I'll leave it up to you." Bogda had no objections. Therefore, Klein helped him shuffle and cut the deck before laying them out in an intis formation. Thanks to his uniqueness as a seer, Klein did not flip the other cards. Instead, he directly flipped the card that indicated the final result. A reversed wheel of fortune. "Things will develop badly," he said solemnly as he shot a glance. The color in Bogda's face strained instantly and his lips trembled. "Is it hopeless?" As Klein tried his best to think of a solution, he said, "Let me try a different divination method. Please leave your ring behind. Next, write your date of birth on this piece of paper. Then, please wait outside quietly." Influenced by his gentle and comforting tone, Bogda calmed down and followed the instructions by writing down the information and leaving his ring behind. As he watched Bogda leave, Klein wrote a sentence on the piece of paper. Outcome of Bogda Jones's surgery. He picked up the ring and paper slip and leaned back into his seat before using a dream divination technique. In a blurry and distorted world, he gradually found himself, only to see the gentleman collapse with an ashen expression. He was covered in white cloth as he was pushed out of the quaking operating room. This time, Klein didn't encounter anything strange. He no longer felt a sense of being watched, so he quickly woke up. He knitted his brows tightly as he considered how he was going to inform Bogda about the outcome. The surgery may very well lead to death. I can't try the restorative ritualistic magic I learned today, but that would expose the matter of beyonders. Besides, I have to apply for captain's approval first year, and I might not be able to treat such a severe disease. Klein was racking his brains when he suddenly thought of something. Mr. Glassis's lung disease was treated by an apothecary. He said that the medicine was extremely miraculous. What was it? Right, Lawson Dark Wade, 18 Vlad Street in East Borough. Lawson's Folk Herb Store. As he tried his best to memorize the address back then, Klein quickly remembered the details. He rapped the corners of the table and quickly made a decision. After using spirit dowsing to quickly determine if it was a good or bad idea, Klein walked out the door. When he saw Bogda stand up in a fluster, he returned his ring to him and said warmly with a smile, "I found hope for you." "Really?" Bogda asked, pleasantly surprised. Klein did not reply him as he continued talking. "Your hope lies in the East Borough, on Vlad Street. It's related to the single-term Lawson. If you can't find it, come back here again on Monday at 4 in the afternoon." "Good, good," Bogda nodded as he repeated himself. He excitedly fished out his wallet and produced 5 pence and 3 pennies. He had done according to what Klein had said, without using tips to corrupt the truth. The corners of Klein's lips twitched as he received the money, but he smiled brilliantly. "I hope you will find hope as soon as possible." After Bogda left, he handed over the commission like the previous time and also gave Angelica tips, pretending as though he had collected a solly. East Borough, Vlad Street. Bogda walked from one end of the street to the other, repeating it 3 times until his liver started to ache. Finally, he determined that there was only one place that had anything to do with Lawson on the street. It was the Lawson's Folk Herb Store, number 18 on the street. Mustering his courage, he walked in and caught a smell of the various herbs. He saw that the owner of the shop had black but very short hair. His face was round and he looked to be in his 30s or 40s. The boss's formal attire resembled that of a village witch doctor. It was a deep black robe embroidered with all kinds of strange symbols. "Hello, do you have medicine that can treat my disease?" Bogda asked politely. The boss raised his head and swept his deep blue eyes across Bogda and smiled. "Your liver disease is very serious, but the premise of everything is whether you have the money. Do you have enough to pay for the medicine?" He can tell. Bogda suddenly felt a lot more confident as he nodded frantically. "How much is your medicine?" £10. It's a very fair price. The boss fished out a bag of herbs from under the counter and said, "Add sufficient water and boil it into medicine. After boiling it, add 10 drops of fresh rooster blood, then drink it down immediately. This bag of herbs can be cooked thrice. You will be fine after 3 times." As he spoke, he opened the yellowish-brown paper and threw in all sorts of strange herbs. "It sounds extremely shady." Bogda gulped down his saliva and said, "That's it." The boss stared at him and immediately smiled. "Do you still want something else?" "What about this bag? Once you recover from your liver disease, I can give you a guarantee that your wife will be very satisfied." He chuckled as he took out a black papered bag of herbs and suppressed his voice. "There's mummy powder inside, trust me. A lot of aristocrats consume this stuff. They put it in their tea or boil it in soup." Bogda's confidence in the boss wavered to the point of feeling disgusted. "I believe in Mr. Moretti." He took a deep breath, fished out his wallet, and pulled out the 2 biggest notes from what little was left of his gold pounds. Holding on to the yellowish-brown paper bag full of herbs, Bogda staggered out of the Lawson's Folk Herb Store. While waiting for a tracked carriage, he suddenly came to a realization. He had spent £10 to buy a bag of stuff. This was nearly a month's salary for him. If it wasn't for his trust in Anna and Joyce, he wouldn't have brought that much cash to the Divination Club. Could it be that the reason why Mr. Moretti only accepted 8 pence for his divination had something to do with his collusion with the boss of Lawson's Folk Herb Store, so as to earn more? This was a classic scam written on the papers. When Bogda made this connection, he even began to suspect Klein a little. He even began suspecting Joyce and Anna. When a tracked carriage stopped in front of him, he looked at the herbs in his hand. Unable to bring himself to return, he entered the carriage with a heavy heart. Inside Lawson's Folk Herb Store. As the boss watched Bogda leave, he suddenly turned his head and shouted at the door where there was a pile of herbs, "Charmaine, stop purchasing herbs from today." "Why, master?" A handsome-looking youth with dishevelled hair walked out. The boss smiled and said, "This is the 16th customer that has come because of my fame. If this carries on, I believe them it talks, the machinery have in mind, and the mandated punishers will notice me. When the time comes, I'll need to consider heading to other cities." "Then, do we need to sublease this store?" Charmaine nodded in understanding as he asked with concern. The boss chuckled. "If you wish to stay, you can be the boss of this store. You are already capable of identifying herbs and concocting medicine. Of course, remember to deposit half of your monthly profits into my anonymous Backland bank account. But I haven't learned what you are really good at." Charmaine was already sick of never staying in a city for more than a year. But he was unwilling to give up learning the magical formulas that his master was good at. The boss leisurely rocked himself in his seat. "That's not something you can learn just because you want to." A blackish-green bubbling liquid appeared in front of Bogda's eyes. It smelled of stinking socks, and the color that makes one want to puke made him deeply suspicious about everything he had done today. When the rooster blood was dropped into the medicine, Bogda's father looked at his son worriedly and said, "I think surgery is the best option." The few drops of rooster blood bubbled with the boiling liquid before vanishing. Bogda took a deep breath and said, "If this medicine is useless, I'll consider surgery. The Lord will watch over you." Bogda's father gestured a triangular sacred emblem across his chest. By the time the boiling liquid had cooled down, Bogda had no intention of wasting the £10. He raised his right hand and closed his eyes. Flicking his head back, he gulped down the medicine in one go. The pungent aroma that had the noxious smell of blood swished around in his mouth as he nearly spat out everything he had just drank. That night, Bogda had an upset stomach. He went to the bathroom 6 times, and by the time the crimson moon vanished, he fell asleep groggily. After an unknown period of time had passed, he jolted awake, having dreamed that he was being reprimanded by his boss at work. Thankfully, I took 3 days of annual leave. I don't have to rush to work. Bogda heaved a sigh of relief when he discovered that he felt a lot more spirited. This was in stark contrast to the sluggish state he was in for the past few weeks. Bogda subconsciously reached out and pressed the right side of his abdomen. He noticed that the region, which previously hurt when under slight pressure, felt normal. He only felt the pain from ordinary pressure. Don't tell me it was really effective. That apothecary was clearly just fooling me. Bogda was both surprised and doubtful as he got out of bed. He stretched himself and felt his health returning to him. He fell silent for a very long while as he muttered, "According to the apothecary, I still need to drink it twice. Once I'm done drinking, I'll go to the hospital to get a checkup from a doctor." That apothecary didn't tell me how many times I can drink a day. I still think he's a cheat. Inside the civilian staff office of the Blackthorn Security Company, from his prior request, Klein received a space where no one would disturb him. He held the carving knife and emitted his spirituality. He seriously carved the incantations and symbols onto 2 silver accessories. The incantation was a request to avoid disaster and was written in Hermes. The 2 mysticism symbols symbolized the Evernight goddess as well as the Empress of disaster and horror. Aside from that, Klein also added the path number that corresponded to the goddess, 7, and the magical characteristic. In addition to that, charms and amulets are to be engraved on both sides. And each side's symbols, incantations, and characteristics, their exact locations, or special formats was in the realm of mysticism. The ones that were spread amongst the ordinary populace were filled with mistakes. At that moment, Klein had a lot of damaged materials to his right. Through repeated practice, and only after he confirmed that he had enough practice, did he dare to begin creating the amulets for Benson and Melissa. As he calmed his mind, his spirituality spewed out from the tip of the carving knife. The number 7 appeared on the surface of the silver accessories. He had already finished carving the incantations and symbols on the other side of the accessory. All that was left was to finish the remaining side. After putting down his knife, all his spirituality chained together as Klein suddenly felt a strange, majestic, and terrifying energy surge throughout the room. The commotion quickly vanished as the incantations on both sides of the accessory became complete with Klein's spirit vision. It emitted a serene blackness. He put down his carving knife and gently polished the silver accessory that was formed from a circle and a vertical piece. He felt a tinge of coolness from the mild to the touch surface. It's done. He happily placed the finished amulet and another one that he had previously finished into his pocket, planning to find an opportunity to give it to Benson and Melissa. Amulets created by Beyonders possessed a certain level of effectiveness. They allowed the wearer to unknowingly avoid disasters to a certain extent, but it was nothing too ridiculous. Furthermore, their spirituality would wane bit by bit. Unless one used the high-level ritualistic magic and created a prayer set, a year was the maximum one could use them for. As for high-level ritualistic magic, there was a terrifyingly high spirituality requirement. It wasn't something Klein could endure at the moment. When the time comes, I can use my spirituality to make another one, Klein thought, nodding as he began tidying up the messy table. He didn't make one for himself for the moment, because an amulet of that level had limited effects on him. Therefore, his goal was to gain a deeper understanding of incantations before trying to pair it with ritualistic magic. That way he could create a few defensive amulets that could be activated specifically with sound. After everything was finished, Klein walked out the office and prepared to hand over the damaged materials. That was when he saw Captain Dunn walk over in his black windbreaker. Dunn's deepened grey eyes swept across him as he smiled. "Klein, the Holy Cathedral has approved it. You're now an official member." "Really? That's great." Klein expressed his delight. Dunn nodded and said with a smile, "You can now receive a make-up pay of £3 for this week. You'll receive £4.50 every subsequent week until the advance payment is cleared. By the way, did I mention the Netorks ritual? Every official Netork is to independently complete a mission. Only by doing so will you gain the recognition of your partners. In consideration of the outstanding performance you showed, I believe I can assign you an ordinary mission instead. When that happens, I'll formally introduce you to all the Netorks in Tingen City." Klein replied without hesitation, "All right." £3 plus his compensation of £7. Getting a new suit wasn't a problem anymore. Furthermore, he would still have plenty left over. Well, who knows when my mission will arrive. Klein waited all the way till Sunday, the day of Selena's birthday banquet. Changing into his formal suit and using a brush and handkerchief to tidy his half-top hat, Klein looked himself in the mirror before walking over to the first floor in satisfaction. At that moment, Melissa was sizing up Benson's clothes. "Is there a problem?" Benson raised his cane, feeling a little lacking due to his sister's gaze. He felt that there was nothing wrong with him when he inspected himself. He was already dressed quite decently. Melissa stopped staring at him and said with a serious expression, "Benson, that is a very old suit you're wearing. There will be a lot of excellent ladies and madams participating in today's birthday banquet. I believe that by wearing that, it'll be a form of disrespect to them." Klein was originally filled with questions. However, when he heard Melissa's emphasis, he immediately realized what was happening. He went over with a chuckle and said, "Benson and I share a similar build. He can wear my other tuxedo." He had already informed his siblings about buying a new suit. He explained it away by saying that his clothes had been torn while inspecting certain objects. Therefore, the company generously compensated him. Of course, he concealed the matter of him being promoted with a pay rise. He was afraid of scaring them and only planned to tell them after half a year. Such an explanation made Benson and Melissa extremely envious. They felt that the Blackthorn Security Company was an impeccable employer. There's no need to, right? Benson retorted, having not realized the gravity of the situation. No, it's extremely important. Klein pushed Benson's shoulders up the stairs. My tuxedo is hanging on the clothes rack. After watching Benson go up the stairs in a daze, Klein turned around and smiled at Melissa. Are you hoping that Benson will use the opportunity provided by Selena's birthday banquet to begin a beautiful new romance? He had been reading quite a fair amount of newspapers and magazines recently. He knew that aristocrats and middle-class banquets were typically grounds for blind dates. Melissa nodded solemnly. Yes, Benson has missed out too much because of us. Sis, why are you like a mother? Klein looked at Melissa as he suddenly shook his head with an exasperated laugh. Seeing the unconvinced look on his sister's face, Klein suddenly felt like it was a good opportunity. He sized her up and said with a solemn expression, Melissa, I think you aren't showing enough respect at today's banquet as well. What? Melissa wore a puzzled look. Klein pointed at her neck. As a lady, you are lacking a necklace that accentuates that area. Without waiting for his sister to say another word, he smiled as he fished out a silver amulet wrapped with angel wings from his pocket. Thankfully, I prepared one for you. Melissa was taken aback at first before she asked, how much was it? Sis, your concerns are really quite misplaced. Klein silently scoffed as he explained with a chuckle. It's actually not very expensive. Since it was in an incomplete state, I imitated an item that I've seen before and engraved blessing incantations and beautiful patterns on them. You engraved them. Melissa was indeed distracted. How is it? What do you think of my work? Klein took the opportunity to hand over the amulet to his sister. Melissa studied it before gently biting down on her lip. I like the surrounding angel feathers. If you think the incantations and symbols I engraved are ugly, then just say so. There's no need to mince your words. An amulet's value is in its effects. The corner of Klein's mouth twitched. Just as he was about to urge his sister to accept it, he saw Melissa put on the necklace with a forced expression on her face. She then carefully adjusted the positioning of the amulet. Perfect. Klein sized her up and gave her exaggerated praise. Melissa shot him a glance and looked down at her amulet. She said listlessly, Klein, you were never like that before. Acting like that. Perhaps it's because of my good job. With a decent income, I've become more confident. Klein interrupted his sister and gave a preemptive explanation. Sigh, even though I received the original Klein's memory fragments, making myself appear natural in most major aspects, certain fine details are still there. I'm still used to presenting my real personality, especially when I'm getting closer and more familiar with Benson and Melissa. He sighed inwardly. Melissa seemed to accept his explanation and parted her lips. It's great that you're like that, really great. After the two engaged in a short conversation, Benson came down having changed his clothes. He wore a white shirt with a black vested tuxedo. His black bow tie and a pair of long, straight trousers made it seem like he had undergone a complete makeover. It was like he was a successful businessman after years of hard work. Same for the receding hairline. Klein chuckled inwardly. Excellent, Benson. It suits you very well, he said with a brilliant smile while throwing up his hands. Melissa also nodded in agreement on the sideline. The facts show that my clothing is more important than me, Benson gave a self-derisive comment. Klein took the opportunity to fish out the remaining amulet and repeated his explanation from earlier before saying, I also made one for you. Not bad. I'll bring it with me. Benson accepted it without a fuss as he quipped, Klein, I wouldn't find it odd, even if you were to suddenly know how to style your hair, make clothes, fix watches, and feed curly-haired baboons. Life is just so full of surprises, Klein replied with a smile. Following that, the siblings tidied themselves up before walking out the main door. They took a trackless public carriage and arrived at the North Boroughs Fannia Street, where Selena's house was. The Wood family lived in a terrace house as well, but unlike Klein's place, they had a porch. They had a small lawn in the front which made it look very elegant. When they rang the doorbell, Klein, Benson, and Melissa only had to wait for around 10 seconds before they were able to see the star of the day, Selena Wood. With a head covered in wine-red hair, the girl gave Melissa a delighted hug. I like this dress of yours. It makes you look exceptionally beautiful. Standing beside Selena Wood was her father, Mr. Wood, senior employee of Backhand Bank's Tingen branch. Welcome, our honorable elder brother. Welcome, our young historian, he deliberately addressed Benson and Klein in an exaggerated manner. Young historian, why doesn't he add the description of me having a conscience? Klein retorted as he took off his hat and replied with a smile, Mr. Wood. You look much more spirited and younger than I imagined. His style of flattery had unknowingly inclined himself to the foodaholic empire. Benson held out his hand and shook Wood's hand. I know a lot of bank employees, but they're all equally arrogant and stiff, as though they're the latest machines. None of them are as civilized as you. If you were to meet me at the bank, you might not say that about me. Wood laughed cheerfully. After exchanging pleasantries, Selena, who was wearing a new dress, led the siblings inside with a hop in her step. At times, she would mention in her usual tone that Elizabeth is already here, and at other times, she would suppress her voice saying, Melissa, your brothers are more handsome than I imagined. Hey, I have good hearing, although you are flattering me. Klein helplessly looked at the two 16-year-old girls walking ahead of him. This isn't right. I'm still quite far from being considered handsome TSK. Miss Selena, how ugly did you imagine Benson and I to be? A balding, gloomy, fat man with a pale expression and lifeless eyes. Klein pinched his glabella in passing as he diligently practiced his spirit vision. Miss Selena Wood is healthy. She's excited and very happy. Mr. Wood's lungs are a little problematic. Right, I see his pipe. Klein swept his gaze across the crowd while in a good mood. Elizabeth, Melissa is here. At that moment, Selena introduced with a brisk tone. A girl dressed in a blue frilly dress walked over. She had naturally curled brown hair and adorable baby fat. Klein was stunned when he saw her because he knew the girl. He had helped her choose an amulet back at the underground market. Elizabeth greeted Melissa first before looking at Benson and Klein. She was stunned and her brows knitted slightly, as though she was thinking about something. Soon, Elizabeth smiled and politely greeted them as though nothing had happened. Klein also pretended not to recognize her. Under Wood's lead, they came to the sofa in the living room where they were introduced to Chris, Selena Wood's brother, and the other guests. As Klein watched Benson chat with Chris and the other solicitors happily over the topic of their neighbor, Mr. Short, he couldn't help but feel envious. I don't have such socializing skills. He picked up a cocktail from a table in the corner of the room as he listened quietly. At times, he would nod and echo with a smile. It didn't take long before all the guests arrived and the banquet officially began. As too many guests had been invited, the Wood family's dining table could not accommodate everyone. Therefore, the banquet was done in a buffet manner. The maidservant served the steak dishes, roast chicken, fried fish, mashed potatoes, etc. and placed them on different tables. The male servants were responsible for carving the meat, allowing for guests to take what they wanted. Klein couldn't help but click his tongue when he saw the elegant enamel plates and silver cutlery. He felt that the Woods were being too extravagant as a middle-class family. Since they're so rich, why would Chris need so many years to prepare for his wedding? When he thought of what his sister had previously mentioned, he was puzzled. Yeah, it was probably to save up money to buy this cutlery that would have taken them so many years to afford. To such families, they have to look respectable. Amidst his mixed emotions, Klein picked up a plate and walked in front of a dining table. He forked a piece of honey-glazed roasted meat. At that moment, Elizabeth, with her adorable baby fat cheeks, came over. As she looked at the food, she whispered, "So you are Melissa's brother, thank you. Selena likes the amulet I gave her a lot. She said that she felt healthier the moment she wore it." Selena amulet. Klein suddenly recalled the reason for selecting an amulet for the girl beside him. It was to give to a friend who liked mysticism as a birthday gift. That friend was Selena. Selena liked items related to mysticism. Klein frowned slightly as he smiled politely. It might just be akin to a placebo effect. After saying that, he began waiting for her to praise Emperor Cell. However, Elizabeth's reaction was that of confusion. What's a placebo effect? It means it's completely psychological. At times, we believe that we will turn for the better and end up really becoming better, Klein explained crudely. No, she said it's different from the amulets that she bought in the past. It feels different, Elizabeth emphasized. She cocked her head and shot a glance at Klein and said curiously, I never expected Melissa's brother to be an expert at mysticism. As you know, I studied history, so it's common to encounter similar matters. Klein diverted the topic skillfully as he asked, are you also studying at the Tingen Technical School? No, Selena and I were Melissa's former schoolmates. Later, she went to a technical school. I study at the nearby Ivos Public School, Elizabeth explained seriously. A public school wasn't established and maintained by the government. Instead, it was a school that accepted students from the public. It was an evolution of good grammar schools whose goal was to groom graduates so as to enter university. The schools were rather expensive and they would consider the student's family background. It could even be out the range of typical middle-class families. She didn't talk much. After choosing her food, she returned to Selena's side. After congratulating the star of the day on a happy birthday, the banquet gradually came to an end. Klein and Benson were invited to a game of Texas Hold'em. The small blind was half a penny, and the big blind was a penny. As for Melissa, Elizabeth, Selena, and their friends, they went upstairs. It was unknown if they were chatting or playing games. Klein's luck was pretty bad. He played about 20 rounds, but didn't receive a good hand at all. All he could do was fold and be a spectator. When he flipped the ends of his cards again, he found a 2 of hearts and a 5 of spades. Shall I try a bluff once? Klein considered for a moment, but did not manage to muster the courage. He also resisted the urge to use divination to cheat. He covered his cards and rapped the table, indicating that he was not making a call. Then, he got up and left the table to head for the bathroom. Russell was also a person with obsessive-compulsive disorder. He actually found an odd reason to name the playstyle Texas. Klein shook his head as he proceeded forward. At that moment, he suddenly came to a halt as his pupils constricted. His spiritual perception told him that there was a strange fluctuation upstairs. The strange, twisted, and obscure fluctuation was short-lived. Shortly afterwards, Klein even suspected that he was hallucinating. If he wasn't considered rather skilled at spiritual perception, it was very likely that he would have written off the abnormality. Klein frowned as he thought of his sister upstairs. He tightly held on to his cane as he went around the bathroom and hobbled to the Wood household staircase. He quickly went upstairs while following the traces with his spiritual perception before arriving at the living room beside the balcony. This should be it, Klein mumbled as he raised his hand and tapped twice on his glabella. Auras penetrated the walls and a large wooden door before entering his vision. Most of the colors were ordinary with a blurry outline. However, one of them in particular was rippling with a sinister dark green color over its surface that slowly corroded inwards. Just as I thought, something wasn't right. Klein wore an unusually stern expression as he reached out with his right hand and removed the silver chain which was wrapped around his left wrist. He held the silver chain in his left hand, allowing the topaz to dangle before him. When the topaz stopped swinging, he traced the spherical light and chanted inwardly, "The room before me has danger caused by the supernatural." Normally, spirit dowsing was only suitable for divining something that was related to him or the specific circumstances in a small region around him. As such, Klein described the chant in very specific manner that danger could affect him and the room was right in front of him. "The room before me has danger caused by the supernatural." After repeating the chant 7 times, Klein's eyes widened as he saw the topaz rotating in a clockwise motion rapidly. It was an indication that there was indeed danger caused by the supernatural inside the room, and it was of considerable danger. Selena is a mysticism enthusiast. Did something go extremely wrong when she was dabbling with some sort of ritual? What should I do? Klein massaged his brows and wrapped the chain around his wrist before knocking on the door. Thump, thump, thump. He knocked on the door 3 times rhythmically and wore an amiable smile on his face. The door opened with a creak. Militia, who was wearing her new dress, appeared in front of Klein. "Klein, is something wrong?" The girl didn't expect her brother to be here, so she was momentarily surprised. Klein responded with a smile, without any sign of distress. "I was just curious, since I heard you gals enjoying yourselves." "Sorry for disturbing all of you." Melissa lowered her head in apology, feeling somewhat embarrassed. "We're playing with magic mirror divination. Selena knows a lot, and it's very fun. Magic mirror divination, sis. Why don't you gals play Charlie Charlie Challenge 1 or Ouija boards too?" Klein shook his head, feeling both peeved and amused. He looked behind Melissa and into the living room. He saw Selena with her beaming smile and deep dimples. However, in his spirit vision, the wine-red-haired girl, who was holding a silver-coated mirror, was being encroached by the sinister dark green colors. As his mind whirled, Klein deliberated over his words and said, Hey, I won't be interrupting your game." "Ah, right. Where's Elizabeth?" "I had chatted with her over Fisak grammar. She mentioned that she wanted to ask me some questions." "Elizabeth?" Melissa sized her brother up and said in an eccentric tone to emphasize her words. "She's only 16. Hey, don't let your imagination go wild." Klein immediately explained, "It's a very normal academic discussion. Elizabeth is very interested in history and ancient languages." Melissa took a deep look at her brother before saying, "She's inside. I'll inform her." "All right." Klein took a step back and moved away from the door. While watching his sister turn around, he heaved a sigh of relief. Although it wasn't the best of reactions, he was thankful that the person in the danger wasn't Melissa. He only waited for about 10 seconds before a puzzled Elizabeth walked out. She asked curiously, "Mr. Moritti, what's the matter?" "I never said I was interested in history and ancient languages." At that moment, her sentence was halted by Klein's stern and solemn expression. Her nerves tightened as she seemed to sense that something wasn't right. Klein took a few steps diagonally as a gesture for Elizabeth to hide partially behind the door. The girl with the chubby baby fat was influenced by the sudden serious atmosphere, so she unknowingly followed. "As you know, I'm a mysticism enthusiast." Klein halted and turned around, speaking directly to the point. Elizabeth nodded and replied, "Yes, I even believe that you're an expert at mysticism." "No, I'm only an enthusiast, but this doesn't stop me from noticing that your magic mirror divination has turned into a problem," Klein said with a heavy tone. "A problem?" Elizabeth nearly raised her voice as she hurriedly raised her hands to cover her mouth. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "I know words alone will make it difficult for you to believe me. Return to the room, and when Selena isn't paying attention, steal a glance at the front of the mirror which Selena has hidden away from all of you." "How do you know that she hid the front of the mirror from us?" Elizabeth blurted out. "According to the information from the talks, more than 90% of the time, magic mirror divination cases which involve evil share such similarities." Klein smiled and said, "General knowledge." When the doubtful and frightened Elizabeth returned to the room, his composed smile vanished instantly. His face looked worried. "Even though we're all in the North Borough, to go from Fannia Street to Jarland Street will take at least 15 minutes of travel by public carriage. By the time Captain arrives after making a round trip, the situation might have deteriorated to a hopeless state if only Benson and Melissa wasn't here, but I can't deal with those hidden and unknown existences do I have any means to contain." "You're right, Selena is a mysticism enthusiast. Her room definitely has no lack of pure dew, essential oils, herbs, and other items." Just as Klein was racking his brains for a solution, Elizabeth sat next to Selena by using an excuse of discussing something with her. A girl opposite her sipped a mouthful of red wine, and under the teasing looks of everyone, despite her blushing, she mustered her courage to ask, "Can you help me divine where I'll meet a romantic and handsome gentleman?" Selena lightly coughed twice as she rubbed the mirror's back and said, "Mirror, mirror, tell me, when will the gentleman in Yomina's heart appear?" After repeating it 3 times, she picked up the mirror and raised it in front of her. Seizing this opportunity, Elizabeth suddenly turned her body and stretched out her head to take a glance. According to her expectations, she felt that she would see Selena's face and half her face. However, the only thing she saw was Selena. The tiny mirror only had Selena, and it was Selena's entire body. The mirror was completely pitch black, with Selena standing in the middle with a cold expression. Elizabeth trembled all over as she lunged backward and leaned against the sofa. She momentarily forgot to breathe. She involuntarily trembled and without giving an excuse, got up immediately, stumbling to the door. She didn't even dare to turn back to look at the beaming Selena. Yon Innes gentleman would appear on the Sunday of the second week, half a year later. Amidst giggles, Elizabeth opened the door and left the room to see Klein, who was standing in the shadows of the wall lamps in his tuxedo and half-top hat. Mr. Moretti, aye, she stammered in a daze. Klein calmly smiled. Don't disturb the girls and ladies inside. Infected by his smile, Elizabeth calmed down significantly. She extended her hand and closed the door as she quickly walked over to the wall lamp. I saw it. I saw only Selena inside the mirror. A devil like Selena, she whispered hoarsely. Indeed, Klein's expression turned serious as he asked in a deep voice. Do you know which is Selena's bedroom? Do you know where her mysticism items are? There, the mysticism items are in there as well. Elizabeth didn't hesitate to point at the room diagonally across. Klein held his cane and walked over, opening the unlocked wooden door. Under the street lights and the crimson moon's illumination, he turned a valve and lit a gas lamp. A pale yellow light glowed as he swept the area and found bottles of pure dew, flower essence, boxes of herbal powder, candles and amulets. These items were placed on tables or neatly arranged inside a rack. Their names were given on sticker labels. After confirming the items, Klein said to Elizabeth, who had followed behind him, Do you want to save Selena? Yes. Elizabeth subconsciously nodded before asking in a daze, Will it be dangerous? A certain amount. After all, I'm only a mysticism enthusiast, Klein replied frankly. A certain amount of danger. Elizabeth pursed her lips tightly for a few seconds before saying, Is there anything you need from me? Klein smiled warmly as he comforted her, Don't be nervous. Now, all you have to do is pretend to return as though nothing had happened. Return to Selena's side. 5 minutes later, remember 5 minutes later, tell Selena that you have a pleasant surprise and bring her to me. Knock on the door softly, one long knock and 2 short ones. Following that, well, leave it to me. Elizabeth thought over it silently before nodding seriously. All right. Seeing her return to the living room, Klein glanced at his pocket watch. He closed Selena's bedroom and quickly cleared the desk. Then, he picked the items needed and placed them on a chair. Immediately following that, he picked up 2 faint candles with a light aroma. He placed them on the upper left and right corners of the desk. They were symbols representing the Lady of Crimson and the Empress of Disaster and Horror. Klein planned on holding a ritual here to borrow the Evernight Goddess's powers to ward off the mysterious and unknown existence that was affecting Selena. As he was only a sequence 9, the ritualistic magic he knew wasn't strong enough. In order to succeed, he needed Elizabeth to lure Selena into a sealing circle, right in the vicinity of the altar. Therefore, he needed to consider situations in which Selena might notice and resist. Due to these reasons, Klein planned on using suspension-style ritualistic magic. A paper and pencil game played using held or balanced pencils to produce answers to questions they ask. A board with letters, numbers, and other signs around its edge, to which a planchette, movable pointer, or upturned glass moves, supposedly in answer to questions from people at the scenes. Suspension-style ritualistic magic referred to the termination of a ritual according to the Beyonder's judgment. They could finish other matters first before returning to continue the ritual. Even by doing so, it was still possible to gain the desired effects. This was a technique produced over 1,000 years of ritualistic magic development. After all, many high-level ritualistic magic required multiple steps. The duration ranged from an hour to half a day before finishing. It was difficult to ensure that no one disturbed them during the entire process or that there wouldn't be any accidents. After gaining lessons from various predecessors through blood and tears, gaining feedback through each failure, being able to suspend ritualistic magic became mainstream at the higher levels, while it also indirectly affected the lower-level rituals. However, being able to suspend a ritual didn't mean that the ritual could be suspended at any time. One had to abide by mysticism theory and grasp the corresponding technique. If not, the failure of the ritual was unavoidable. It could even result in a terrifying backlash effect. Based on Klein's understanding, once one gained the attention of a particular divinity, and the divinity was waiting on the contents of the request, to suddenly say, Wait, I need to use the bathroom, one can only be congratulated since they might never need to go to the bathroom ever again. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he composed himself. Even though he had held many luck enhancement rituals and had even designed a corresponding ritual that made an attempt at justice and the hanged man, this was his first actual ritualistic magic that abided by the rules. After looking at the silver inlaid cane by the side of the bed, Klein picked up the 3rd candle and placed it in the middle of the desk to represent himself. He placed the silver bowl that Selena used for rituals in front of the 3rd candle and replaced the axe with a sacred emblem. On the left were the pure dew and essential oils of the moonflower, slumber flower, and other plants. While on the right, he placed a plate of sword, a small silver dagger, a piece of fake goatskin, and a quill that was dipped in ink. Luckily, Selena had a complete inventory. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had any way to complete the preparations. As for the moderately fast rituals that old Neil could perform, they were not something a seer could do. From the looks of it, Selena was quite an experienced mysticism enthusiast. Yes, if she wasn't experienced, then she wouldn't have gotten into such trouble. She was only 16 and had been exposed to all of this for at least a year. Who had guided her? Ideas flashed through his mind as he picked up Selena's cup from the bed. He poured plain water into it and placed it beside the coarse salt. He took out his pocket watch and popped it open. He didn't delay any further after taking a glance at it. He traced layers of the spherical light in his mind and quickly entered meditation. The room that was filled with floral fragrance was suddenly subject to a formless whirlwind. Klein put away his pocket watch and his eyes suddenly turned darker, from brown to black, as though he could see through one's soul. He extended his palm and laid it against the candle on the top right corner. He chanted inwardly, Evernight Goddess, you are the Lady of Crimson. As Klein chanted, he extended his spirituality and rubbed the candle wick. After a couple of moments, the candle suddenly lit up, and there was a tranquil blue inside the dim yellow light. Evernight Goddess, you are the Empress of Disaster and Horror. Just like he did before, Klein successfully lit up the second candle on the top left corner. I am your loyal guard, the shield that fends against danger in the dark night, and the long spear that stabs at evil in the silence. Whoosh! The third candle that symbolized Klein began to burn. The flame was still. He picked up the small silver knife and mimicked old Neil's motions. He used incantations, coarse salt, and plain water to fulfill the purification. Then, he let his spirituality that he had gathered spewed out from the tip of the silver dagger, and naturally merged them as one. With the silver knife in hand, Klein walked around the bedroom kneeling when he came to the bed and sealed the area with a formless barrier. The light from the street lamp outside the window suddenly disappeared, but the red light was still shining through quietly. Klein returned to the study desk and picked up the quill. With spirituality and ink, he drew incantations and symbols to ward off disaster. When all of that was finished, he put down the things he was holding. Then, he trickled a drop of pure dew, flower essence, and essential oils on each of the 3 candles. Sizzle. A faint fog filled the room, which suddenly possessed an additional hint of mystery. Next, he burned a few types of herbs before taking a step back from the mixture of fragrances and began reciting the corresponding incantation in the suspension ritualistic magic. Nobler than the stars and more eternal than eternity, the Evernight Goddess. I pray for your loving grace. I pray for you to show your loving grace to a devout believer of yours. I pray for the power of the crimson. I pray for the powers of disaster and horror. I pray that you will cleanse your devout believer, Selena Wood, from evil's corruption and be safe from danger. I pray that you would wait for a moment for that unfortunate girl. Moonflower, a herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Slumber flower, a herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. After reciting the incantation, Klein closed his eyes and repeated it 7 times in his heart. He saw that there was nothing out of the ordinary at the altar. He then lifted the silver dagger again and took a few steps back to the door of Selena's bedroom. He tapped his chest in 4 spots, forming the shape of the crimson moon. He then turned around and raised his silver dagger. His spirituality spewed out from the tip once again and sliced open the shape of a door in the formless wall. Klein knew that even if he opened the door at that very moment, it wouldn't affect the tranquility and holiness of the altar. He took out his silver vine leaf pocket watch to tell an intricate pattern. He checked the time and went through the process that was to happen in a few moments. In the living room on the 2nd floor, Elizabeth's body was quivering as she lifted her head from time to time to check the wall clock. She was counting down in silence under the illumination of the 2 gas lamps. It's almost time. As she spoke softly, she looked sideways at the lively girl with long wine red hair. Her dimples were deep, her smile was bright, and she gossiped well with all the friends around her. But the more everything looked normal, the more terrified Elizabeth felt. The cold and horrifying Selena in the mirror seemed to be in her head, and she couldn't wipe the image away. I can't wait anymore. I have to take action now. Elizabeth suddenly stood up. Before everyone's shocked gazes, she smiled and stuttered, Selena, I have a surprise for you. Follow me out for a bit. Really? Didn't you give me a birthday present already? Selena flipped the mirror the other way around and stood up in surprise. The surprise will not have any signs. Elizabeth felt that she had no talent in acting at all. Without saying another word, she walked toward the bedroom door first. Selena followed behind with a confused smile. Melissa looked at her 2 best friends leaving, and unconsciously knitted her eyebrows. Elizabeth is acting so strange today. She started acting even stranger after she met Klein. She suddenly ran out earlier and said that she needed to use the bathroom, but why did she look so anxious? Selena's bedroom entrance. Elizabeth took a deep breath and said to the girl in front of her, let's go to your room. Elizabeth, you seem very nervous and afraid. Why? Selena looked puzzled at her good friend as she noticed her body trembling constantly. Excitement. Yes, excitement. Elizabeth shot a glance at the mirror in Selena's hand as she turned half her body around to knock on the door with a long knock followed by 2 short successive ones. Why are you knocking on the door? Selena was baffled even more. Creak. Her bedroom door opened. Dressed in his black tuxedo and half-top hat, Klein appeared in front of the 2 girls. Pleasant surprise. This is a pleasant surprise. Selena's mouth turned agape as she felt perplexed. At that moment, Klein suddenly reached out his hand and grabbed her by the wrist. He pulled her into the room as Elizabeth stood rooted to the ground. Simultaneously, Klein's silver dagger struck forward as it spewed out his spirituality, which quickly mended the door-shaped passage. The invisible spirituality wall sealed off the room, insulating Selena's screams within. Bang! Klein suddenly closed the door, and without even looking at Selena, he rushed to the desk. The wine-red-haired girl stopped screaming as she looked up and surveyed the room. Her gaze rapidly turned cold as her skin was mottled with paleness. Her fingers rapidly grew sharp fingernails. And at this moment, Klein had already returned to his cogitation state. He trickled a drop of moonflower and essential oil onto each candle as he chanted loudly, Supreme Lady of Crimson, Great Empress of Disaster and Horror. I pray for you to bestow your loving grace. Show your loving grace to the lost lamb, Selena Wood. While chanting, he picked up the fake goatskin and pushed it onto the candle representing the requester. Whoosh! He felt a cold wind blow behind him as an immense energy assaulted his body. The goatskin was ignited and Klein threw it into a silver bowl. Then, he crouched downwards in accordance to his preparations to dodge the lethal strike. Whoosh! 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 The wind howled ferociously, and Klein felt the uncontrolled outpour of his spirituality surging like the currents. He saw the goatskin burning in the tiny silver bowl, burning in silent darkness, and he heard heavy items landing on the ground behind him. Bam! Bang! The two sounds followed one after another with almost no breaks in between. Wisps of dark green gases plunged into the silver bowl and vanished into the illusory darkness. Klein rolled to the side and got up. He drew his revolver from his armpit holster. However, he saw that the adorable red-haired girl Selena had fallen to the ground and the silver-coated mirror had shattered into countless broken pieces on the carpet. Those shattered pieces didn't reflect Selena, but showed the ceiling and Klein's silhouette. Then, through the spirit vision he had left active, Klein saw the wicked dark green in Selena's aura had vanished completely. Everything returned to normal, but she seemed more frail. He had just relaxed when he felt a sharp, throbbing pain in his glabella and head. The sharp pain spread all over his body and made him want to roll around on the floor. Klein held his fists tight, and the veins on the back of his hands popped and became black. They looked like moving worms. Simultaneously, he heard silent screams and the whispers that ripped at his mind. It took him nearly 20 seconds to survive the ordeal. His forehead and vest was soaked in cold sweat. The ritualistic magic I used sucked up all my spirituality and almost made my beyond powers lose control. Klein made a rough guess of the situation. That also made him notice that he had digested quite a bit of the remaining energy in the potion. Based on his calculations, if he had the strength at the time he consumed the potion, he believed that there was no way he could have survived the ordeal. He could have become a monster straight away. Acting is quite effective after all. Klein tapped his glabella and wiped away his sweat. He turned towards the altar, tapped his chest 4 times, and said out loudly, "Praise the Lady." Following that, he extinguished the candles and quickly tidied up the altar. Finally, he placed the items back into the desk and used his silver dagger to dispel the spirituality wall seal. Whoosh! The sound of the wind echoed before subsiding. Klein let out a long sigh of relief and felt a sense of lingering fear. If I hadn't walked through the process beforehand and successfully completed the ritual, then things would have become troublesome besides. I still don't know who my opponent or enemy is, thankfully. Yes, thankfully, the room was carpeted, so I didn't damage my clothes while rolling. He shook his head and reached up to open the wooden door to Selena's bedroom. How was it? Elizabeth took 2 steps back and asked nervously. Klein looked at her terrified expression and took off his half-top hat before saying with a warm smile, "I've already corrected the mistake of her magic mirror divination." "It's been resolved now. Has it really been resolved?" Elizabeth asked in disbelief. Klein smiled and nodded casually. "Yes, it wasn't too hard." That last part was a lie, he added inwardly. Perhaps it was the fact that Klein had been calm and collected all this time, or perhaps he was her only ray of hope. Either way, Elizabeth didn't doubt him anymore. She patted her chest and heaved a sigh of relief. "Thank you. You truly are a trustworthy gentleman. I was scared senseless just now. How is Selena? Is she fine now?" "She might remain unconscious for the next few minutes, but she's completely fine now." "Oh, 2 to 3 days of weakness is to be expected." Klein suddenly had a stern expression on his face as he asked, "Who taught her mysticism? Didn't he tell her about the basic taboos?" Elizabeth straightened up a little more like a student who had just been scolded by her teacher. She thought for a moment before saying, "Selena once mentioned that her teacher is Harness Vincent. She met him a year ago at the Divination Club on Howes Street. Harness Vincent on the surface, he didn't seem to teach anything questionable about magic mirror divination, but he secretly been teaching dark divination. If I knew about this earlier, then I would have reported it to Captain and have raided him earlier." Klein felt some regret as he asked in a deep voice, "Was he also the one who taught Selena magic mirror divination?" Klein was left with a lingering sense of fear, because this matter had nearly affected his sister Melissa. Elizabeth nodded cautiously. "Yes, but Selena had tried magic mirror divination a few times without any success. Oh, today she told me that she had a peek at her teacher's hidden incantations and that there would be no problems. She was basically an expert at courting death." Klein massaged his temples to alleviate his headache. "Do you still remember the incantations she recited?" Well, although Harness Vincent had not voluntarily imparted the dangerous knowledge to Selena, it's obvious that he had been experimenting with it to extend an invitation to a mysterious, unknown entity. This would become a problem sooner or later. It has to be dealt with quickly before it gets worse and becomes a problem for someone else. "I remember a part of it," Elizabeth recalled. "She recited it in Hermes. As you know, I was only exposed to Hermes just recently. All I remember is her using the terms revolve, spirit, creator, and grace. Creator, the true creator. Many underground mysticism enthusiasts believe in this ancient entity revered by many secret organizations. Yes, an entity that appeared 1,000 years ago during the early stages of the 5th epoch." Klein nodded amidst his thought and said, "Remember to ask Selena about the entire incantation after she wakes up, then find an opportunity to tell me." "All right," Elizabeth replied without any reservations. But she immediately asked, feeling a little confused, "Mr. Moritti, why don't you ask her yourself?" I don't want to let Melissa know I enjoy mysticism. Can you help me keep to the secret? Klein asked in return. Elizabeth bit her lips, her eyes sparkling. No problem. Melissa prefers machines to mystery. She likes logic over instinct. Klein placed his hat in front of his chest and bowed gentlemanly. Thank you for your understanding. As for Selena, you do know that she's not someone who can keep a secret. A more accurate description is that she likes to share secrets with others, Elizabeth agreed. Klein put on his hat and thought for a moment before saying, remember to tell Selena after she wakes up that she suddenly fainted and shattered her mirror. I think her memory probably stopped at the point when she began the magic mirror divination. Seeing Elizabeth nod, he put on a stern expression once again and said, remember, be it divinations or trying other mysticism rituals, do not pray to any other entities other than the 7 orthodox divinities. You should immediately burn those types of incantations and stay far away from anyone distributing those materials. If I hadn't noticed this in time, Selena would have turned into a monster or an evil spirit in 10 minutes, and everyone here would have been killed, myself included. Thinking about the ice-cold Selena in the mirror, Elizabeth had no doubts about what Klein had just said. She sighed with lingering fear and said, I understand and I'll remember. I'll also keep an eye on Selena. All right, go and take care of Selena. Klein raised his black cane and walked toward the stairway. As he walked, his eyes became darker. He took out a single penny with his right hand and flicked it into the air. Selena is all right now. Selena is all right now. Klein quickly repeated the description, then caught the falling coin. He saw George III's face facing upward. This was not a simplification of spirit dowsing. Instead, it was a simplification of dream divination. At that moment, Klein had forced himself into a state of sleep with the aid of cogitation in order to take a tour through the spirit world. The heads and tails of the coin were a symbolic manifestation. Heads representing affirmation, while tails indicated dissent. Great, everything is fine now. Klein twirled the bronze coin with his fingers happily. That was a simplification only a seer could accomplish. Elizabeth was staring at Klein's back and saw the flying coin before he caught it. Only when Klein vanished down the staircase did she turn to enter the bedroom. She saw Selena asleep on the floor with shattered pieces of the mirror beside her. She held her breath and tiptoed into the room as she looked at the fragments of the mirror. She made sure that the ice-cold Selena was no longer present. Instead, the fragments were reflecting the ceiling. Phew, put completely at ease, Melissa heaved a long sigh of relief. But despite her efforts, she couldn't move Selena to the bed. Instead, she nudged her awake. Elizabeth, what happened to me? Did I get drunk? Selena asked weakly, the glow in her eyes having turned considerably dull, while her eyes were filled with confusion. Elizabeth thought for a moment and replied in a serious tone, no, Selena, something happened to you. Your magic mirror divination invited a malicious entity. Is that so? Selena weakly made her way to the bed with Elizabeth's help. She rubbed her temple as she said, all I remember is when I started the magic mirror divination. Elizabeth told the half-truth, you were a completely different person during the ritual. The you in the mirror was completely different from the you in real life. I was very scared. Using the excuse of giving you a surprise, I brought you into the bedroom before I snatched your mirror and shattered it onto the carpet. After that, you fainted. Blessed be the goddess, you're okay now. I don't remember anything, Selena muttered, her face pale. The more Selena tried to remember, the emptier her mind became, and the more afraid she felt. Subconsciously, she glanced at her desk and noticed that the placement of items was clearly different. Just what happened exactly Selena tried hard to remember, but she could only faintly remember a man in a black suit and hat. He was not strong or tall, but he had a straight back. Selena, Elizabeth said seriously, I met a mysticism expert when I went to the underground market to purchase the amulet. He said that we shouldn't pray to any entity other than the 7 orthodox divinities. Otherwise, we would be sure to invite disaster. Promise me, don't try this anymore. I didn't even know if what I did could save you just now. Selena was scared senseless. She nodded in a daze. No more, I'll never try this again. And, just what did the incantations of your mysticism mean? If I have the chance to meet a mysticism expert again, I will ask him for you, Elizabeth asked, feigning nonchalance. Selena rubbed her temple and said, Spirit that revolves this world, the grace of the true creator, the eyes that look at fate. Tap, tap, tap. Klein smoothed the creases and patted the dust off his clothes as he walked down the stairs. After that, he took off his hat and returned slowly to the long dining table. Where did you go? It has been nearly 10 minutes, Selena's brother, Chris, asked as he folded his hand. Klein smiled and replied, to the bathroom, then upstairs to acquaint myself with the ladies. I appreciate your honesty, Chris praised in laughter. He had the red hair and short build that ran in their family. He wore gold-framed glasses and had quite the personality. He was an exceptional lawyer. You wouldn't say that if you knew that I had knocked your sister unconscious upstairs, Klein replied humbly. We were merely engaging in academic discussion. In the area of mysticism, he put down his hat and returned to his seat. He received his 2 cards as the new round started. Flipping out the corner of his cards, he saw the King of Spades and the Ace of Diamonds. Looks like I became luckier. Is this payback for doing a good deed? Klein took out a coin in preparation to place his bet. Since Harness didn't intentionally reveal the incantation to Selena, there's no need for me to urgently report this to Captain. He continued his cautious playstyle in the following rounds, only betting when he had a good hand. He didn't take any chances to bluff and didn't win much. When the game ended at 10:30, he had won 6 pence. I won 2 solly and 8 pence. Benson fiddled with the notes and coins in his hand. I didn't expect you to be an expert at poker, Klein praised, laughing. No, I don't play often, but I know that this is the same as negotiation. You have to hide your cards and figure out the hidden cards that people have before using various means to scare or entice them. Benson hadn't finished his sentence when he saw Melissa and the rest coming down from the second floor. It's time to go home, said Klein as he glanced at his sister and her friends while rubbing his temples. The throbbing pain in his head remained. After that, Klein went to the bathroom once more and took the opportunity to walk past Elizabeth and obtained the complete incantation. Returning to his siblings, he smiled and said, "Oh right, I suddenly remembered something. I need to head back to the company for a while. Shall we go to Xiaoplan Street first?" "It'll be quick. What is it?" Benson asked casually. Melissa looked at her brother with a serious expression because she felt that Klein's behavior tonight was strange as well. In fact, it only looked slightly more normal than Elizabeth's behavior and, later, Selena's. Klein chuckled as he had long thought of an excuse and said, "There was a mistake in one of the document descriptions. And I already informed my colleagues that I would hand it over to them when I arrive early at the company tomorrow morning. So, I can either amend it now since it's on the way, or wake up at least half an hour earlier tomorrow morning." "No doubt, I've chosen to do the former." "Ah, no wonder. I had a nagging feeling that your mind wasn't in the game, so you were actually thinking about work." Benson smiled, suddenly enlightened. "No, I apologize. I should say, the card game helped you think." "All right, we shall wait for you." Melissa looked away and smoothed out the ruffles of her engagements. As it was past the operation time for both track and trackless public carriages, the 3 siblings bid their hosts farewell before hiring a carriage nearby. It cost 2 solly for 45 minutes. "I've heard that every carriage driver that rents out their own carriage adds ridiculous fees," Benson complained in a low voice. He had used most of the money that he won earlier to pay the driver. Klein smiled and replied, "I think it's very acceptable. After all, it is almost 11 o'clock. I was just joking. I thought that we could actually share the carriage with other guests. 45 minutes can take us to many places." Benson looked out of the window at the other people who were hiring carriages one after another. "I know," ride-sharing Klein rubbed the top of his silver-inlaid cane and said, "We don't have a problem with that, but the other customers might." "Benson, did you notice that they care a lot about their image and at looking respectable? I think that might be common among the middle class." Benson nodded seriously and said, "The Wood family was much more extravagant than I imagined. However, Wood's weekly salary is only £4 per week. Hey, looking respectable might be the biggest difference between the middle-class people and curly-haired baboons." "Do you have something against curly-haired baboons?" Klein almost burst out laughing. Melissa didn't join in on their discussion. She took a seat and sized up Klein from time to time. Her gaze was sending chills down his spine. The 2-wheeled horse carriage was traveling quickly in the dark, quiet street. They arrived at Xiaoplan Street in only 12 minutes. "Wait for me here. 5 minutes. It won't be more than 5 minutes, Klein emphasized. He put on his top hat, grabbed his cane, and got off the carriage. As the carriage driver was charging based on time instead of distance, the driver didn't mind waiting. Going up the stairs, Klein arrived at the Blackthorn Security Company and knocked on the door. Within 10 seconds, the door was opened wide. Leonard Mitchell appeared before him in a vest and shirt. "You're not on duty tonight," Leonard pointed out, looking surprised to see him. Klein was only on guard duty once a week for the Kynasgate. They maintained a regular work schedule for the rest of the time. As for emergencies that happened at night, they would be dealt with by the sleepless who enjoyed the night. However, only getting 2 to 3 hours of sleep a day can cause baldness and memory loss. Whenever he thought about this, Klein couldn't help but ridicule Captain Dunsmith in his mind. "I have something to report," he answered simply. "There's a mission?" Leonard asked casually, moving aside. When Klein entered the reception hall, he saw Dunn coming out in his black windbreaker. His grey eyes were dark as usual. "Captain, I came across an incident involving the supernatural." "Give me the details," Dunn asked directly. Klein recounted the whole story from earlier and reported the steps that he took to deal with it. "So, I think there's a need to investigate Harness Vincent. Back then he believed that since the evil entity that was invited by the magic mirror divination hadn't caused the disaster, and there was no indication that he was in extreme danger. That meant that the entity probably still needed more time. It didn't want to awaken or possess Selena ahead of time. Therefore, as long as its goals were not exposed, the evil entity chose to observe the situation. Under such circumstances, it wasn't hard for Elizabeth to trick Selena to head to the entrance of the bedroom. You've done well. You seized the opportunity before the evil spirit fully materialized to possess her body completely." Dunn lifted his head lightly and said, "Let us take care of the follow-up investigations. You can return home to rest." Klein heaved a sigh of relief and chortled. "I thought you would make this my initiation mission and make me complete it alone." From the incantation that Elizabeth provided him, Harness Vincent was certainly dangerous. "That's because there's already an initiation mission for you," the desultory Leonard chuckled by the side. "What?" Klein was shocked. Dunn smirked and explained with his soothing voice, "At around 7 tonight, the police station referred us to a case. From our initial assessments, there doesn't seem to be any danger or urgency, so it was decided that you would complete it on your own tomorrow. All right, don't ask about the case. Rest well tonight and move your day off to Tuesday or Wednesday." "Captain, doing that only affects my sleep plus. Monday afternoon is when the tarot gathering takes place. Do I need to send a postponement notification to Justice and the Hanged Man?" Klein shook his head and smiled bitterly. He then bade farewell and left. Exiting the stairway, he suddenly sensed something. He lifted his head to look towards the carriage that they had hired. He only saw Melissa looking at him silently through the window. When they made eye contact, Melissa suddenly looked away and sat properly. The corner of Klein's mouth twitched, and he got into the carriage, pretending nothing had happened. Under the crimson moon and pure night sky, the carriage moved quickly down one street after the other. When they returned home, Klein yielded the bathroom to Benson for his shower while he went to Melissa's bedroom and knocked twice. Melissa, who was planning to use the other bathroom, opened the door and looked at her brother suspiciously. Melissa, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask? I know you do, Klein asked straightforwardly. Don't just observe me in silence. Melissa's lips trembled and creased her eyebrows as she spoke. Klein, what did you do to Elizabeth? She seemed a bit off. And, later on, Selena started acting very strange too. Klein had prepared his reply. Do you know that Elizabeth and Selena are mysticism enthusiasts? Yeah, but I don't like it. I don't think there's anything that can't be explained in this world, Melissa answered seriously after being momentarily taken aback. Anything that seems unexplainable is due to the fact that the knowledge we have grasped is insufficient. Yeah, I think so too, Klein echoed her sentiments guiltily. I once thought so too, until I successfully courted death. He coughed lightly and continued. Mysticism involves Hermes, the language used specifically for ancient worship ceremonies and prayers. Elizabeth knew that I am good at it. Hey, it is within a historian's domain after all. So, she asked me about the pronunciation of corresponding words and their actual meanings. Melissa nodded lightly, signifying her acceptance of her brother's explanation. It went according to her understanding of both parties. As for why Elizabeth and Selena became weird later on, I have no idea about the actual reasons. Klein removed himself from the picture first, then he said, but, I can make a guess. You managed to guess it, Melissa blurted out in shock. Klein lifted his hand and patted his lips. I could guess from the contents of what Elizabeth asked. The few Hermes words were related to divination, as well as the worshipping of evil entities. Yes, when Selena did the magic mirror divination, did she recite in Hermes? He proactively brought that up in order to remind his sister to keep her guard up against similar situations. It would be even better if she could cut off contact with Selena and Elizabeth. Yes, Melissa replied after a delay. I think I understand why Elizabeth and Selena were acting strange. Then, Klein asked deliberately, as Selena's magic mirror divination involved a wicked, illegal belief. Perhaps Elizabeth found an opportunity to criticize and correct Selena's mistake after she clarified with me the actual meaning of the Hermes that Selena had used. I think so. Melissa didn't doubt this conclusion because she had made the same deduction herself. Klein let out a breath of relief upon seeing that he had successfully directed the flow of the conversation. In the future, it's best if you advised Selena to put her beliefs in the orthodox. Then, he tapped 4 spots on his chest just like a priest. Yes, I will, Melissa replied, sounding determined. And, don't tell Elizabeth and Selena about our deduction or about the things that I've said. I actually promised Elizabeth not to tell you, Klein emphasized. Okay, Melissa nodded lightly. On Monday morning at 8, in the Blackthorn Security Company. Klein took off his hat and greeted Roseanne and Bredt. After exchanging a few words, he entered Captain Dunn Smith's office. He pushed the door open and looked around. He suddenly had a shock, because Dunn's face was pretty pale and his grey eyes looked clouded, without their usual darkness. What happened? Harness Vincent, Klein asked in concern and shock. Dunn rubbed his forehead, took a sip of coffee, and replied with a bitter smile, Harness Vincent is dead. Who killed him ahead of time? Klein sat before Dunn with his cane in hand. Dunn didn't answer immediately but sighed and said, Leonard and I went to look for Harness Vincent last night. As his usual behavior didn't show any unusual signs and there was nothing odd about his house, I decided to enter his dreams to look for clues. In his dream. His eyes showed fear as Dunn repeated himself twice. That was when he said, in his dream, I saw a cross, a huge cross, one that blotted out the sky. On the huge cross there was a naked man nailed to it with black nails. His arms and legs were pinned with his arms extended outwards. He was hung upside down, he said hung low like a chandelier. There were strips of blood stains on his body. Upon seeing such a scene, I lost consciousness. I left Harness Vincent's dream, and when I woke up, Leonard told me that Harness had died in his sleep. Huge cross, hung upside down, the man covered in bloodstains. It's similar to some of the stories of the true creator that some of the hidden organizations believe in. But there are considerable differences too. Klein made a deduction in suspicion. The few hidden organizations that believed in the true creator had only appeared in the last 2 or 3 centuries, such as the Aurora Order and the Iron and Blood Cross Order. However, similar such depictions had never disappeared over the past 1,000+ years. Dunn rubbed his forehead again. We'll follow up on this. As for you, go ahead and complete your initiation mission first. Klein nodded and said, all right, but I still don't know what my mission is. Nothing dangerous. I haven't seen any signs of danger at the very least, Dunn emphasized. This is a case which was referred to us by Golden Inducer's police department. The famous philanthropist Sir Wayville has been experiencing unusual harassment over the past month. Be it his bodyguards, the security guards he has employed, or the police, none of them have been able to find the culprit. Inspector Toll, who is in charge of this case, suspects that it involves beyond the powers and, thus, handed the case over to us. I saw Sir Wayville at the library the other day and noticed that he was feeling down and lethargic. So it was a result of being harassed. Klein knitted his brows and asked, what kind of harassment is it? There hasn't been any physical harm inflicted yet. Thus, the harassment wouldn't be considered dangerous. Sir Wavell hears moans and cries every night, no matter where he is, be it St. John or not. This has affected his sleep quality negatively. Dunn flipped the notes in his hands. He has seen a psychiatrist and has asked his butlers and servants to confirm that it was not an illusion. Having confirmed that it isn't a hallucination, thus, it is suspected that someone is harassing him. Closing the file, Dunn looked up at Klein. Change into your probationary inspector uniform in the break room, then meet Inspector Toll, who is in charge of this case at the shooting club. He'll provide you with more details. Probationary inspector uniform? Klein asked instinctively. Dunn rubbed his forehead and smiled. Half of our salary comes from the police department, and the title of probationary inspector doesn't merely belong in the records. When you met Leonard and I for the first time, we were also wearing uniforms. This is a perk held by fully official members. Yes, the perks, as Emperor Cell would call it. Unfortunately, I can't wear it as a casual outfit. Otherwise, I'd be able to have another spare outfit. When my clothes are being washed, Klein picked up his cane and bade farewell before leaving the captain's office. He headed toward the break room and saw a black and white checkered uniform, complete with leather boots, placed on the table. The uniform's peak cap was embroidered with the logo of the police department, 2 crossed swords and a crown. Located on the shoulder was a black and white epaulet with a shimmering silver star. This is a probationary inspector uniform. Klein glanced at the uniform and noticed a string of numbers under the silver stars, 06-254. He had some understanding of the police rank structure in the Loan Kingdom. He knew that those at the top were the minister and the chief secretary of the police force. Under them were the respective commissioners, deputy commissioners, assistant commissioners of the various police departments. Those in the middle were superintendents and inspectors, while those at the very bottom were the sergeants and constables. After closing the door, Klein took off his suit and hat before changing into the uniform. He hung his suit up and left the room. He made his way into the clerk's office and looked at himself using the full-body mirror that Roseanne brought to him. The young man in the mirror had black hair with gentle brown eyes. The uniform on his body accentuated him with a heroic spirit. Not bad, Klein praised himself narcissistically. He left his cane in the office and left the Blackthorn Security Company. Inside his pockets were a full set of equipment, ranging from weapons to his police badge. At the hall of the shooting club, Klein met Inspector Toll immediately since he was the only one in a police uniform. Of course, there's me too, Klein thought. There were 2 silver stars on the epaulets of Inspector Toll's uniform. His clothes were propped up by his stomach and he had a thick blonde mustache. His frame was tall but not imposing. Perhaps it was imposing in the past. Moretti, Klein Moretti, Inspector Toll noticed Klein and welcomed him with a smile. Hello, Inspector Toll, I believe that you have the right person, Klein replied amicably. Then following his memories, he raised his right arm, kept his fingers straight and tight before saluting. Toll chuckled. I can tell that you will be a young man who's easy to get along with. That's good. Shall we head to Sir Wavell's place now? Even though he was a higher rank than Klein, the tone in his query was obviously friendly. No problem. Klein thought for a moment before he said, you can fill me in on the details of the case on the carriage. Sure. Toll stroked his thick blonde beard and guided Klein out of the shooting club. They boarded a carriage which was stopped on the other side of the road. There was but 2 crossed swords and a crown, police emblem on the carriage, and it came with a personal carriage driver. Sir Wavell is a believer of the goddess, so we refer the case to you, Toll said quickly as he sat down. I know, the fine knight is a common figure on the covers of newspapers and magazines. Klein flashed a friendly smile. Toll picked up the docket beside him and removed the seal before taking out the materials inside. As he flipped through them, he explained, regardless, even if you are aware of it, I need to provide you with a detailed briefing. Sir Wavell is one of the richest tycoons of St. John City. He built his career beginning with a lead and porcelain factory. It has now expanded to steel, coal, shipping, banking, and bonds. He is also a great philanthropist that has been praised by the king, having set up the Wavell Charity Foundation, the De Wavell Trust, and the De Wavell Library. He was also knighted 5 years ago. If he were willing to run for mayor, I don't think anyone in St. John City could contest with him. But Backland is his goal. He wants to become a member of Parliament. We once suspected that the harassment might be related to this, but we have no clues to this date. Klein nodded slightly and said, we can't rule out that possibility, but there's nothing to confirm that suspicion as of now. Toll didn't dwell on this point. He continued, from the 6th of last month, Sir Wavell has heard painful skin-numbing moans every night when he sleeps, akin to a patient's fight for his life. He has checked the surrounding rooms multiple times, but he hasn't found anything unusual. His butler and servants have also confirmed that they heard such sounds, but it is simply softer for them. In the beginning, Sir Wavell believed that this matter would pass quickly and didn't pay too much attention to it. But the moans became more and more frequent, to the point of occasionally happening during the day. There was even the addition of heart-wrenching cries. This has made Sir Wavell lose sleep. Time and time again he had no choice but to leave St. John to his villa in the villages. But it was to no avail. The moans and cries persisted. Similarly, the phenomenon persisted even in Backland, just that it wasn't as serious. He employed security guards to check his surroundings, but they didn't find any clues. Our preliminary investigations also came up with nothing. Sir Wavell, who has been tortured for more than a month, is on the brink of collapse. He visited psychiatrists time and time again but was unable to have his problems resolved. He told us that if this problem was not solved within a month, he would leave St. John and head to Backland. He believes that there would be people who can help him there. After listening to Toll's explanation, Klein quickly analyzed and came up with a few possibilities. He offended beyond and is suffering from a curse. No, if he were suffering from a curse, the butlers and servants in his house wouldn't hear the same things. There's a beyonder with unknown motives hidden among his servants and bodyguards. But the problem stems from the point that there has been no requests made of Sir Wayville over the past month. Perhaps Sir Wayville accidentally came into contact with some vengeful evil spirit. That possibility cannot be ruled out. The carriage entered the Golden Eagle's Borough while Klein was still deep in thought. It stopped at the door of Sir Wayville's house. A steel fence surrounded a lush garden. There were two statues by the side of the hollowed metal gates, a magnificent fountain that showered a marble sculpture with water, an expansive two-story building, as well as a path wide enough to fit 3 carriages. Even the knight's house is only 2 stories high. The newspaper reported that Backlund is experimenting with building 10-story apartments. Klein got off the carriage and saw a sergeant with 3 chevron stripes walking over briskly. He looked at Klein and saluted. "Good morning, sir. Good morning." Klein nodded with a smile. Toll smiled. "This is Sergeant Gate. You can tell him if you need anything." "This is Probationary Inspector Moretti, a history and psychological expert from the police department." Toll introduced Klein to Gate. "I don't deserve such a title." Klein felt a little embarrassed. After the greetings, Gate pointed to the 2-story building behind the fountain and said, "Sir Wayville is waiting for us." "All right." Klein caressed the revolver at his waist. That was his best bet against an enemy. Since he was in police uniform, he could put his revolver in the holster at his hip, making it easier to draw it. As they spoke, the trio made their way down the path, around the fountain, and arrived outside the door. By then, the door was already opened by a servant who was waiting politely at the side. As Klein pretended to adjust his hat, he tapped twice on his glabella to activate his spirit vision before entering the house. The square-faced Sir Wayville was massaging his forehead in the hall. He was clearly in low spirits. His blonde hair and blue eyes were either dry or dull, as though he had aged considerably by at least 5 years. "Good morning, Sir Wayville." Klein, Toll, and Gate bowed at the same time. Sir Wayville stood up and forced out a smile. "Good morning, officers. I hope that you can resolve what has been causing me distress." At that moment, Klein squinted and slightly knitted his brows. Other than his low spirits, Klein couldn't find any other problems with Sir Wayville. "That's odd," he thought for a moment before he said, "Sir, in which room did you first hear the moans?" "In my bedroom." Sir Wayville shook his head. "Can we take a look?" inquired Klein. "Haven't you checked it many times?" the middle-aged butler interrupted from the side. It was clear that he didn't notice that Klein was the partner of the kind-hearted soul that had not pocketed the money that he picked up. Klein smiled, composed. "Those were my colleagues, not me." "Sir, this is an expert sent by the police agency," Toll said, taking the opportunity to introduce him. De Wayville looked at the young expert and said, "All right, Cullen, take him to my room." "Sir, I hope that you will come with us," Klein said seriously. De Wayville hesitated for a few seconds before saying, "If that can solve the problem." He grabbed his cane as he spoke. He made his way feebly toward the staircase with the butler Cullen and several guards beside him, ready to support him if needed. Klein surveyed the surroundings as he followed behind them silently. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, they arrived at the 2nd story and entered the master bedroom. Klein didn't have the time to survey the surroundings when the hair on his body stood on their ends. This was feedback from his spiritual perception. Sir Wayville's bedroom was larger than the living room and dining room of Klein's house combined. It was partitioned into a place for a bed, a living space, a changing room, a bathroom, and a study desk and bookshelves. The furnishings were exquisite, and the details were extravagant. But to Klein, the light seemed dimmer and the temperature was several degrees colder than the outside. At the same time, he seemed to hear the sound of sobbing and moaning, as though one was putting up a last-ditch struggle. Klein was in a trance, and everything suddenly returned to normal. The sunlight shone brightly through the window and poured over the entire bedroom. The temperature was reasonable, neither too high nor low. The surrounding policemen, bodyguards, and butler were quiet. No one spoke. This he looked sideways at the classic yet luxurious bed. He felt there were pairs of blurry eyes lingering in the shadow, like the moths that fearlessly stayed around gas lamps. Taking a few steps closer, Klein lost the earlier images from his spirit vision. Not a standard wraith or an evil spirit, what is it exactly? Klein frowned and recalled the mysticism knowledge that he had been learning all this time. From what he had seen, the mission would have been easy if it was passed to a corpse collector, grave digger, or spirit medium. It was obviously not within his domain of expertise. Holding back his urge to use divination as an investigative approach, Klein looked around slowly to look for other traces to confirm the few guesses on his mind. "Inspector." Sir Wayville hesitated and asked, "Did you discover anything?" "If it were that easy, I believe my colleagues wouldn't have waited until now," Klein replied, glancing at the philanthropist subconsciously. Just as he planned to retract his gaze, he suddenly saw that there was a faint white human figure reflected behind Sir Wayville in the mirror behind him. No, there were many figures overlapping each other, resulting in a white, distorted figure. The figure flashed by and Klein seemed to hear faint sobbing. He let out a breath to ease his nerves, having almost drawn his gun out of fright. Heightened spiritual perception with spirit vision will one day scare me senseless. Klein tried relaxing his tense nerves by joking around before redirecting his focus back onto Sir de Wayville. This time, he saw something different. Now that he was in the bedroom, Sir de Wayville had a faint and twisted figure shimmering around him. It even dimmed the lighting of that area. Every flash was accompanied by an illusionary cry and moan that could hardly be detected by an ordinary person. Hardly audible for an ordinary person under ordinary circumstances. Is it because it's daytime? Klein nodded as he thought. He had an initial judgment for this case. It was resentment that was haunting Sir de Wayville. It was the remnant spirituality that resulted from unresolved emotions before a human's death. If such feelings of resentment stayed in this world over a period of time, they would become a terrifying wrathful spirit after becoming stronger. However, Sir de Wayville was a famous philanthropist. Even Benson, who was a picky person, was in awe of him. Why would he be bogged down with the resentment of the dead? Is he actually two-faced? Could it be the means of the Beyonder with nefarious intentions? Klein guessed the possibilities suspiciously. After some thought, he looked towards de Wayville and asked, "Honourable sir, I have a few questions." "Please ask." De Wayville sat down wearily. Klein organised his thoughts and asked, "When you leave here to go to a new place, such as the village or backland, do you temporarily get at least half a night's worth of peace before the situation resumes and gradually worsens? Even when you sleep during the daytime, are you able to hear moaning and sobbing sounds?" De Wayville's half-closed eyes suddenly widened as his deep blue eyes were suddenly beaming with hope. "Yes." "Did you find the root of the problem?" Only then did he realize that due to his extended period of insomnia and his poor mental state, he had completely forgotten to inform the police about such an important clue. Seeing that Klein's question had uncovered something useful, Inspector Toll relaxed. He knew that the network had found the clue. Sergeant Gate was surprised and curious too. He couldn't help but look closely at the psychological expert, Klein. It coincided with the traits of gradual entanglement and the feature of accumulation. Having received the feedback, Klein had basically confirmed the cause. Then, he had two ways of helping Sir de Wayville to shake off the burden. One was to set up an altar directly around the man and remove the resentment of the dead entirely using ritualistic magic. The second option was to use other mysticism measures to find the root of the problem and solve it from there. Taking into consideration the rule of preventing commoners from learning of Beyonder powers to the best of his abilities, Klein planned on first attempting the second method. Only if it failed would he pray to the goddess. "Sir, yours is a psychological illness, a mental problem." He spoke nonsense with absolute seriousness while looking at de Wayville. Sir de Wayville knitted his brows and asked in reply, "Are you telling me that I'm a mental patient, that I need to enter an asylum?" "No, nothing that serious. Actually, most people have psychological problems to one degree or another," Klein casually comforted him. "Please allow me to introduce myself again. I am a psychological expert from the Our County Police." Psychological expert. De Wayville and his butler looked at Inspector Toll, who they were familiar with. Toll nodded seriously and confirmed that it was true. "All right, what do you need of me for my treatment? Besides, I don't understand why my butler, my bodyguards, and my servants will hear the sobbing and moaning as well." De Wayville held his walking stick with both hands, looking confused. Klein replied professionally, "I will explain it to you after it's resolved. Please tell your butler, your servants, and your bodyguards to leave. Inspector Toll, Sergeant Gate, please leave as well. I need a quiet environment to begin the initial treatment." Treatment with magic," Inspector Toll added in his heart and nodded at Sir de Wayville. De Wayville fell silent for more than 10 seconds before saying, "Cullen, take them to the living room on the second floor." "Yes, sir." Butler Cullen didn't retort since the request was made by a police officer, a probationary inspector, and a psychological expert. After watching them leave the room one after another and closing the door behind them, Klein looked at de Wayville, who had dark blonde hair and blue eyes, and said, "Sir, please lie down on your bed. Relax and try to sleep." "All right." De Wayville hung his coat and hat on the clothes rack before walking slowly to the side of the bed and then lay down. Klein drew all the curtains, turning the room dark. He took off his pendant and quickly used spirit pendulum to determine any dangers. Then, he sat on the rocking chair near the end of the bed, traced a spherical light in his mind, and entered cogitation. He allowed the world of spirituality to extend before his eyes. Then, he leaned against the back of the chair and fell into a deep sleep, allowing for his astral projection to make contact with the external world. He was using the technique of dream divination to let himself be in the spiritual environment like he was dreaming, so as to communicate with each and every resentment that plagued Sir de Wayville. Only communication would be able to give him an answer and solve the problem. Whoosh, 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 a sad sob reverberated in Klein's ear, and he saw that the white translucent figures were floating around him. A painful groan echoed as Klein, who barely regained his mental processes, extended his right hand and touched one of them. Suddenly, the figures swarmed at him like moths darting toward a fire. The image before Klein's eyes suddenly turned blurry and his brain seemed to be cleaved into two. Half of his mind was calmly observing while the other half saw a mirror. In the mirror, there was a young girl dressed in worker garbs. She looked strong and fit as she walked in a dust-covered factory while her head throbbed in pain. Her eyesight occasionally turned blurry and her body became skinnier by the day. She seemed to hear someone calling her Charlotte, and the voice said that she had a hysterical illness. Hysterical illness? She looked towards the mirror and saw that she had a faint blue line on her gum. The mirror's view switched and Klein saw another girl called Mary. She too walked into the lead factory, young and lively. Suddenly, half of her face started twitching, followed by her arm and leg on the same side. "You have epilepsy," she heard someone say while her whole body was convulsing. As she twitched and fell, the intensity increased before she finally lost consciousness. There was another girl, and she was depressed. She was walking around the street in a daze, to the point of having a speech impediment. She had a very bad headache, and she had a blue line on her gums. She would also convulse from time to time. She met a doctor, and the doctor said, "Lafayette, this is a result of lead poisoning." The doctor looked at her with pity and saw her convulse again. She twitched continuously, and the doctor saw that her eyes had lost all their light. Many images appeared before Klein, and he remained immersed within them and calmly observed. Suddenly, he understood the plight of the girls. The female workers had been in extended contact with white lead. They had all died of lead poisoning as a result of long-term exposure to the dust in powder. Sir Wayville had a lead factory under his name and also 2 porcelain factories. All of them hired comparatively cheaper female workers. Klein saw all of that in silence and felt that there was something that still had not been clarified. Such death resentment was insignificant. They could not affect reality or have any effect on Wayville even when accumulated. Unless there was a more powerful and stubborn resentment that had united them all. Just then, he saw another girl. The girl was no more than 18 years old, but she was glazing the porcelain in the factory. "Haley, how are you doing lately? Do you still have a headache? If it gets too serious, remember to inform me. Sir Wayville has enforced a rule that people with severe headaches cannot continue being in contact with lead and must leave the factory," an elder lady asked with concern. Haley touched her forehead and replied with a smile, "Just a little, I'm okay." "Tell me tomorrow if it gets any worse," the elderly lady exhorted. Haley agreed. When she returned home, she massaged her forehead from time to time. She saw that her parents and brothers had returned, but their faces looked hopeless. "Your father and brothers lost their jobs," her mother said as she wiped her tears. Her father and brother hung their heads low and muttered, "We will try to get some work at the harbour. But we don't even have bread money for the day after tomorrow. Maybe we will need to move to Lower Street." Haley's mother looked at her with reddened eyes. "When are you getting your pay?" "It's 10 soldi, right?" Haley massaged her forehead again. "Yeah, Saturday. She didn't say anything else and remained as quiet as usual. She returned to the factory the next day and told her supervisor that her headache recovered and she felt fine. She smiled and walked 5 kilometers back and forth to work daily. She massaged her head more and more frequently. "You haven't found another job?" Haley couldn't help but ask her father and brother while looking at the soup which was boiling with black bread. Her father said in frustration, "The economy is in a recession. Many places are retrenching. Even the harbour jobs are sporadic. I could only get 3 soldi and 7 pence a week." Haley sighed and fell into her usual silence. However, she hit her left hand that was twitching suddenly. On the second day, she walked to work again. The sun was shining brightly, and the street grew busier and busier with pedestrians. Suddenly, she started convulsing all over. She fell to the side of the road, foam spewing out of her mouth. She looked up into the sky and her gaze turned into a blur. She saw people walking past and others getting close. She saw a carriage pass by with the Wayville family emblem with a white dove with its spread wings as if ready to take off. She tried hard to open her mouth, but she couldn't make a sound. So, she didn't say a thing, quiet as ever. But the difference this time was that she was dead. The original inspiration for these girls come from Jack London's The People of the Abyss.